Year 2, Mrs. Hines here to help you plan your writing for the week. So I know on your learning menu you have been asked to write about a picture of the Sphinx, which is in Egypt. So I've been doing some research about it, and I'm sure lots of you will have been too. So it's a perfect chance to use some of what we now know about the Sphinx and about Egypt in our story. So I've got our planning boxes just like we've used in class, and I thought that we could fill them in. I'll talk you through my ideas as we go. Okay, so I've had a think about my boxes. Now, I know when I'm writing a narrative, a story, our purpose is to entertain. We want our readers to feel excited. We want them to feel like they'd like to read on. So, for example, if you think about when we were reading stories like The Great Fire Dogs, we were all, when we got to the end of the chapter, we were saying, oh, we want to know what happens next. And that's how we want our reader to feel when we write our own stories. Now, our story is about Egypt, a really exciting place. So when my reader reads my story, I want them to actually feel like they're in Egypt. I want them to feel like they're on that journey, that they could imagine themselves being one of the characters and going along the story with the people in the narrative. Now, the GPS to include, I've just chosen a few main things here, and you might want to put some more things in your story. But what I really want to make sure I've got in my story is some noun phrases to make sure I'm using those adjectives, because if I want the reader to feel like they're in Egypt and that they understand the character, I'm going to have to really use some descriptive language so that the reader can understand them more. I've got some conjunctions on here, and I know that's a challenge that you've been given on your learning menu. And when I get to the next stage of my planning, I'm even going to write myself a little list of the different conjunctions that I want to try and use in my story. And I could even tick them off when I've used them, and I could use them more than once in my story. I've also put different punctuation. So we've started to have a think about commas, about questions, about exclamations, because I know that you will all be able to tell me we need capital letters and full stops. So I've not put it on here. It doesn't mean I don't want them in my story. Just means that these are 3 things I'm going to really try and do, because I already know I'm going to focus on my handwriting and my capital letters and full stops. So now that I've got the kind of bigger overview of my story, I'm ready to move on to the more detailed part of my planning. So I'm going to think about the 5 parts of my narrative. So I know that at the very beginning, I need an opening. After the opening of my story, I'm going to have the build-up. Then we have our problem. We have the resolution, and finally we have the ending. So thinking first of all about my opening. So I know I need to introduce my character and I need to introduce my setting. So I did some research and I found that there was a group of explorers who were in Egypt trying to see what they could find. And there was a man called Auguste. So I'm going to decide that my main character is a man called Auguste. So I need to remember a capital letter for his name because it's a proper noun. And I'm going to write some phrases that will help me describe him. So he had, I'm going to say, a long grey beard. So I've got a noun phrase in there. And I've got a comma as well, so I can look at my different punctuation. I don't just want to describe what he looked like. I think it's also important that we describe the personality. So what is our person like? So I think Auguste is an explorer, so that must mean he's quite curious. If you're curious, you want to know more. So he's a curious man. Okay. And I think I might need to do some description of my setting. So I'm going to say it's a dry, sandy place. And I'm sure you'll be able to think of some different adjectives and even more description. I might decide to describe what the weather is like, the fact that he couldn't see any water for miles around, that it was a really empty, desolate place, so that the reader really understands that it's a very quiet place and there's not much there. So in my build-up, I'll just move that down a little bit. In my build-up, I'm going to talk about the fact that he is in the desert and he's exploring. in the desert, he's exploring. So remember, these are just notes. I'm not writing full sentences because that's the job I've got when I start my writing. And I know we've looked at adverbs, so I might decide to say that he was wondering inquisitively. So again, if you're inquisitive, it's kind of a different word for curious, but I've already used that word, so I want to try and use some different language. So he was wandering inquisitively. And again, even my verb there, rather than just saying he was walking, I've changed it to wandering. So he's wandering inquisitively in the desert. So I'm building up to the fact that he's kind of looking for something. Okay, so let's have a think. So now problem. Okay, the problem is that suddenly he sees something sticking out of the sand. So he walks over to it and he thinks, what is it? And as he kind of starts to brush away some of the sand, he notices it looks like the head of something, the head of a statue. The problem though is that it's too big, because he realises as he looks out that it's so tall, so it must be very deep under the sand, and that it's very long. Okay, so the problem is that and at this point he doesn't know it's the Sphinx, does it? So we could call it the strange shape. So the strange shape underneath the sand is too big. So part of his problem is that he can't dig it alone. Okay, so for our resolution, what could he do then? He can't dig it alone. And when I was doing my research, Auguste was alive in a time when they wouldn't have had mobile phones or iPads, so he couldn't just call up a friend. So I think instead the resolution, I'll just have to move out of the way a little bit. The resolution is perhaps that he had to travel back to his office. So he travelled back and he had to find more helpers. And then the ending, so what might happen at the end? So the ending could be that they've gone back, so this time Auguste and all of his helpers have gone back to where he found this thing, and they dug, and I might use some repetition there, so they kept digging, I like that. So they kept digging and digging. And I certainly think you'll be able to do some neater handwriting than me. It's not very easy on the bottom of this whiteboard. And I think rather than saying that he found the Sphinx, I might try to think of a more exciting verb. I'm going to use discovered. Sphinx. And I think that will definitely be a sentence that I could exclaim. That's pretty exciting, isn't it? Discovering the Sphinx. And if I had some more space, I might also add some sentences describing the Sphinx, because remember, our reader might not have done the research, so they won't know what the Sphinx is. They won't know what's there. Now, already in this planning, I can think of lots more that I might add. So I would add a story opener. And it doesn't have to be once upon a time. Try and use that lovely language that we've been developing. In my build-up, I might want to add a little bit more about who he was wandering with, where was he wandering, what things did he see, how was he feeling, okay? In my problem, I might want to describe the strange shape, maybe describe his thoughts. So he wondered, was it just a pyramid, like the other pyramids that he'd discovered? But he kind of realised it must be a little bit different because it didn't look as pointy. In my resolution, okay, you might think about how he would travel back to his office and what he might say to the people when he gets there. As we've already discussed in our ending, we might want to think about how he would discover it and what would they think and feel. And you could do some lovely description of what the Sphinx looks like. Now, the main thing that you've been asked to focus on your learning menus is your conjunctions. So I'm just having a look here and thinking, where might I use one? I could say, August was really excited to find a strange shape in the sand, but it was too big for him to dig alone. So I've used but. He was wandering inquisitively because he had a feeling there was something exciting lurking underneath the sand. So I've used because. So you can see that these ideas, they're not full sentences, but then when I start to write my story, they made it a lot easier for me because I've got some great ideas. Now, you just heard what I was doing there as well. I haven't got a pen and paper and started writing straight away. I've been saying those sentences out loud, okay? And you can hear them and think, oh, could I think of a better word, a different word perhaps? So I will leave the planning here, and I can't wait to see your emails with the pictures of your stories all about the Sphinx. Bye!